Oklahoma gets some help along the offensive line. Next, here at the Voice of College Football, Boomer Sooner. Lock it in for the next 60 minutes. Bring those comments and questions. Leave them in the live chat. You know the drill. Jason and myself will certainly have plenty to talk about, as we typically do, but this works best when you leave your comments and questions there in the live chat for the next 60 minutes tops. We shall see. We, of course, go on here with our Oklahoma show typically on Wednesdays. We're here on Friday. That's one of the big reasons in coordinating schedules why. Please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. And of course, Jason Ray makes it all work. Jason, we appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here as always, Mark. Thanks for having me.
No, you're not feeling the best, so thanks for showing up and rest in fluids. That's about all the good word I've got for you, but I'm sure you've heard that about 1,000 times. So that's usually the formula this time of year. All right. Well, the formula for the transfer portal is, I believe, a 45-day window that ended on Wednesday. So 2 days ago, January 18th. And then the next window will open, I believe, on May 1st, following everyone's conclusion to spring practice. Heard it commented by somebody the other day that even that 45 days needs to be reined in a bit, that it's a bit excessive, that these student athletes should be able to make a decision in a shorter period of time than the 45 days. But one big piece of news that turned Oklahoma's way was, of course, the decision ultimately made by offensive lineman Walter Rouse, whom we have discussed here for the past couple of weeks, who made a commitment. And this would be the first, and I'm guessing that it's happened before, but this would be the first one that I can recall where we're, of course, discussing throughout the year flips on the recruiting side from high school into college. But this is the first that I can recall a flip from a commitment from a transfer where he originally had committed to Nebraska from Stanford, and a couple days later had a change of heart and decided on Oklahoma.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. And it's not I've not heard much in regard to your point in regard to flips from a transfer perspective. I've seen there's a couple of situations. One at Oklahoma State that I saw that one of their transfer running back, Sean Tyler, I believe his name, from Western Michigan, did commit to Oklahoma State, that had flipped to I can't remember the school, but flipped somewhere else. But yeah, it's very rare on the transfer side. So yeah, this was a good. I mean, Oklahoma, with they had some, they're losing quite a bit on that offensive line. This year, you've got Anton Harrison, that is going to be an NFL draft pick in some variety. And then you've got a couple of others that are from graduation and stuff like that. So you've got some needs. And then Oklahoma, many people on here probably remember that Jacob Sexton had gotten he played a little bit in the bowl game. He was a starter because of all the guys that were sitting out or injured or whatever, what have you. And he got injured early in that game, and it was a significant injury from what I understand, something that may possibly keep him out for a good part of 2023. So I think stockpiling this talent, not only on the recruiting trail but also through the transfer portal, was big. So very, very big addition from to your point with the flip from Nebraska to Oklahoma. It's kind of interesting how that played out. I had heard a day or so before his announcement to Nebraska that we kind of lost, that Oklahoma had kind of lost out on him, and then it was really kind of radio silent on him, and then they kept working him and they flipped him. And so I don't know the reason. I think everybody always just assumes when a flip happens it's NIL related. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I don't know that it's not the case, but I think in this situation, for whatever reason it was, Oklahoma continued to not accept no for an answer and continue to work through that at a position of real need for them on the offensive line. So that's really kind of the only big news from a transfer portal perspective. As you'd mentioned, Mark, the portal did close on Wednesday, and will open back up as soon as spring practice and all the spring games and things like that have concluded. This year. So I think as you look, there's obviously at this point there's a lot of evaluation of the people that Oklahoma was able to bring in, and what do they look like on campus? What does it look like once spring ball starts? What does the spring game look like as a kind of an evaluation of that talent? And then obviously they'll look and see, okay, what do we need to do next as you kind of transfer, no pun intended, from spring to fall, and see where that's at. I still think there's probably some needs from a receiver perspective. We'll see how some of that looks here in the spring, but I think there's a need for a couple of guys that they might look at spring related, and then I think there's some interior defensive linemen. Those are the two areas that I would suspect. If Oklahoma looks to adding some additional guys there, and through the portal, that's the two spots that I would anticipate those guys coming from.
You can talk college football all the time on our Discord that runs 24/7, 365. So talk Sooners, talk college football. We've got a channel for each and every, and when I say channel, don't get that confused with YouTube, basically chat rooms for each and every conference. Go to patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV, and sign up there. So Walter Rouse is a player that logged 39 starts at Stanford, over 2,500 snaps. He was an honorable mention Pac-12 all Pac-12 performer in 2020. When it comes to NIL, Jason, here's my thought that, okay, let's go pre-NIL and to just standard pre-transfer portal to this extent and pre-NIL just to high school football recruiting. And we would see a fair amount of flips all over the country, but they would typically take weeks, if not months, to take place. Therefore, wide receiver A commits to school A in March, and then we see 3 months later he flips to another school, and there's a reasonable expectation that obviously other schools continue to pursue them, stay in relationship with him, and he had a change of heart, and that's what happened. Well, you bring the NIL into play, and this short a period of time in which this particular player committed to Nebraska and within days flipped to Oklahoma. That's what I think brings people to the point of wondering how much NIL had to do with this. And I hope we're at a point, and it depends on the player, depends on their needs and their outlook on how much the money's important to them versus the NFL development versus the education versus location versus all sorts of different things. In terms of, I just hope that, and we will see this play out and start to gain more information into various athletes' stories, but that an athlete is not turning down a situation that he believes is better for him because of the coaching staff, because of the location, because of all these things lining up, and having a relationship with a particular coaching staff for a couple of years and flipping to another institution because the NIL is $85,000 instead of $65,000. But if those are the decisions that are being made, I get it. And when I throw those figures out, we're seeing these ridiculous figures in these very rare cases. Jaden Rashada, $13 million. Folks understand that if you look through, and based on the reporting that we're seeing out of outlets like 247 Sports and On3, that most of the time when we're talking NIL money, we are talking in the thousands of dollars range, 20,000, 40,000, 60,000 for most of these players. So they are not the exorbitant amounts of money that we see reported that obviously grab people's attention. But it is a factor.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is definitely a factor, and I mean, you're spot on with that. I've heard several people from from the media side of things talk about the fact that, yeah, NIL is a big factor, but at the same time, I think the amount of money, generally speaking, that's being thrown out there is not as probably as astronomical as many of us think that it is or just assume that it is. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, when you have a kid that changes his mind within a a series of 3 to 4 days, then I think it's a pretty big indicator that there was something at that point from a monetary perspective that probably changed his mind. And I think it's very well said that you would hope that it would take excuse me, it would take something fairly significant for him to change, for him or anyone, whoever that is, to change their mind. And so, like, part of that, you would think that recent history comes into play, not necessarily talking about this last year, but the last 15 to 20 years and the number of offensive linemen that Oklahoma's been able to put into the NFL versus what Nebraska has been able to put. Maybe that's something, and heck, I mean, I think it's far beyond our thought process, I think, at this point, but kids do still change their mind from time to time. I mean, they still are, even if he is a, 21-year-old kid at this point, like, kids do change their mind, have a change of heart. So, but I think the expectation has been out there with some of the astronomical numbers and and just how big NIL has been from a recruiting perspective, from a transfer portal perspective, and just, generally speaking, that the first thing that kind of comes to your mind is, yeah, Nebraska couldn't compete with what Oklahoma was putting out from an NIL perspective. And so now you'd mention, and I don't know that I'll be able to repeat his name, but you'd mention the kid's name from Florida, and now, you know, and I think this is the first time that I've heard something like this, where he's trying to get out of his LOI because the NIL deal was not quite what he was told or what he envisioned that it was going to be. And so that's something that's going to continue to happen as well. Like, some of these programs may promise them things that they're not actually able to deliver on, or not what the kid thought they were going to be promised and delivered on. And so I think it's just a little bit of a messy business right now, unfortunately. And it is what it is. I mean, I don't know that I don't think anything will change anytime soon with it, but I think it's one of those things that continues to be a factor, and it's, in the back of your mind, um, if you've got a big time player that's committed, to Miami. Let's just say, had it's a good program, traditionally speaking, but has not had the type of success over the last, 15 years that they had in the 80s and the early 90s, right? So when they are, a top 10 recruiting from a recruiting class, people think, okay, Miami, there's a lot of money in Miami. There's a lot of, like, the lifestyle and things like that has to do with it. So, I think there's there's probably concern from some of the smaller schools, and I'll just use Oklahoma State as an example, just because it's local. Oklahoma State is a team, in the program that's not going to be able to compete nationally on an NIL level, right? They're just they don't have the tradition. They don't have as much of the resources, especially with, Boone Pickett's no longer with us. So I think some of those schools are going to struggle. Now, the thing that's kind of the dynamic is, do you have a dynamic coach at a school that's not necessarily able to compete from an NIL perspective? Like, Deion Sanders is a perfect example at Colorado. They are just, I mean, they got the kid to flip from Miami, the defensive back that just recently flipped from Miami to Colorado, and they're, I think, number 3 in terms of the transfer portal rankings. So that's the factor I think that might end up being the silver lining in terms of do we see a situation where you have a big time coach that kids know the name, kids just want to play for a guy like Dion at a non-traditional power school, particularly over the last few years, and does that even out the playing field a little bit in those types of situations?
To be clear, I'm not making, and I know you know this, but just to be clear to everyone, I'm not making any type of judgment on Walter Rouse. First and foremost, I was just stating that based on the timing, it gives the appearance that NIL may have been a factor. And of course, money is a factor in all of our lives to a large extent. So that's reasonable to think it could be. Maybe it had no bearing on the situation. The deal with Jaden Rashada, the Florida signee at quarterback. I know that a lot of rival fan bases, Miami, Florida State, are having fun with this because here's a guy that is a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the nation, signs with Florida, is promised this huge NIL deal. It falls through, and therefore now I got to think that there can be all sorts of negative recruiting against Florida to say, are you going to be able to trust their NIL offers? Are you going to be able to trust their collective to come through with what they promise? Excuse me, but knowing there's so much gray area here, it's ridiculous, but knowing at least what the intent of this is and the guidelines are supposed to be, there is supposed to be a separation between school and coaching staff versus what the collective is doing. And so the school, in a sense, is not responsible for it. And so for as much as some are getting amusement out of the situation and how bad Florida looks in this situation, the university looks, this could happen. This could happen to your team next. So who knows? But this is I'm also hearing that this has happened before. It just didn't involve the status of the same type of player and this amount of money. Therefore, it just wasn't made public.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one that I remember Mark publicly that was coming was a little with Jordan Addison last year. He was and it whatever happened that got cleared up, and it was after he was on campus that there was some reports that he was not happy with what was being given to him, and so yeah, it's one of those things I think that will continue to happen. Just like I mean, we've it's just it looks different. Recruiting's the same, right? It just looks a little bit different. I mean, we've had coaches. Coaches will do anything, short of maybe not even short of cheating, but coaches will do anything to get these kids on campus within reason, right? I mean, they'll promise them starting spots, they'll promise them this and that, and then once they get there, it's not, they don't really have that same promise. And now, but with kids being able to get out of scholarships very easily, transfer at the drop of a hat, I think it's something that obviously will continue to happen, whether it's NIL, whether it's whatever reason, just being unhappy. And I deal with it's in a much smaller scale, right? But I coach high school and I deal with the kids. The kids' mentality is much different than they were when me and you were that age, if we can even think back that far. Um, kids'
You can't
mentality.
much better than I can.
The mentality is just much different. There is a very entitled mentality that kids have these days in terms of, I believe I should be playing, and if I'm not playing, then it's not my fault. It's got to be someone else's fault, right? And if I'm not being successful, it's because I'm not put in the right position to be successful, or there's something else other than, kind of always taking that ownership, and there's always a way out, and so this this manifests itself to college. We've got so many kids, and we're kind of going off the beaten path to a certain degree here, but just when you think of that, what the transfer portal has allowed, it's kind of confirmed that attitude and that reflection, and that the way a lot of these kids believe, okay, if I'm not a starter within my first year, then I'm going to go somewhere else where I'm going to be able to start. The willingness to do hard things, the willingness to compete, is there with some kids, but by and large, you can see by the number of people that are in the portal that there's a fair amount of kids that aren't willing to compete and don't want to, um, do hard things to be able to, wait 3 years to get your shot at playing. And so, it's just a different, it's a different world that we live in from a collegiate athletic perspective, and I think it's kids everywhere. Just the mentality is so much different than it ever has been.
Big T 928 makes a comment here that we hear repeatedly from all over the place. NIL needs a cap. Well, here's the issue with that. I understand the sentiment. We're thinking, okay, it's ridiculous for an 18-year-old to make $10 million. Well, my pushback on that would be, who makes that judgment on how much money's ridiculous and how much money's reasonable, first of all. But not even from that standpoint. Think of it this way. Your employer, your business, your organization, pick any of them. Well, to be very simplistic about it, they have a budget that's based on how much revenue that they expect to take in. And they have a budget based on that revenue, and based on the value of each position, they have a payroll to say, well, your job's worth $75,000, your job's worth $90,000, your job's worth $50,000. And that is based on what the market yields. This position's worth that, and this position's worth that, but it's also based on how much the companies can afford to pay people. So transition that to, let's say, the NFL. There's a salary cap in the NFL. Well, it's also based on, because they're running a business, and the cap fluctuates based on how much revenue comes in. The revenue goes up. They have a bargaining agreement with the players union that says, if revenue goes up 2%, our salary cap goes up 1.5%, and you keep the other 0.5%, or whatever the deal is. But it's tied to running a business, that we're going to stay solvent and we're going to stay afloat, because we're going to tie the payroll directly to the revenue. And if the NFL starts losing money or doesn't make as much money, well, you know what? The players are going to make less money because the salary cap's going to go down. So it's all tied to supply and demand and the revenue intake versus the payroll. The problem you have here is this money's coming from an outside source. So how can you put a cap on that? It would be like saying, if somebody wanted to show up here, and certainly they are welcome to, and say, we're going to pay Mark and Jason $10 million as a sponsorship for this show. And if people were like, that's crazy, that's way too much money. Says who? That's coming from an outside source. They can give us whatever they want. Just like these collectives. These are outside businesses, boosters, whomever they are.
Mm-hmm.
How do you legally put a cap on that? Put a cap on people's ability to make money. Now, again, if it was tied to the institution and how much college football was bringing in, then it could be a mathematical formula. College football brings in this much money. Oklahoma University football brings in this much money. Therefore, we can pay the players this much money. So here's the salary cap. But this money's coming from an outside source, so they can pay whatever they want.
Yeah, it's much like, an outside source investing in an organization, buying stocks or whatever, however you want to look at it. They're investing in the future of this program through this individual kid, right? So no, you're right. I don't see any way that they could possibly put a cap on it just because it's happening outside of the program. Now, I mean, I know there's a lot of outside people that probably believe, oh, is it really happening outside the program? Are there are these money handshakes still
Sure.
happening and stuff like that? And I'm sure that does happen, but at the same time, the big NIL money is coming from outside of the program, and I don't know how you would ever, um, kind of police it from that perspective. And I think we all knew, everyone was clamoring for something like this. Like kids should have the opportunity to get some sort of compensation for their name, image, and likeness. And now we don't necessarily like the way that it looks. So, and I'm with you. Like I feel like these kids, if there's people that are willing to give a kid that's never set foot, and I'm just saying, the amount here just off my head. I'm not saying that people are getting this, but if a kid has never played at the University of Oklahoma and someone's paying him $10 million to come to Oklahoma, then he deserves to get that. If someone's willing to pay that money to him for someone that's unproven, then how is it on the kid to not be willing to take that? So, um, and I don't know. I mean, again, that's not something that's happening across the board. Obviously, that would be for your mega superstars, and I don't even know that even mega superstars are getting anywhere near $10 million. But there are kids that are getting millions of dollars that have never played. So as it's kind of the American dream, isn't it? Like, you have the right, to pursue the type of life that you want to pursue. If I'm gonna, sit here and look at a computer screen and someone's gonna pay me $100,000 a year just to send a couple of emails a week, then I'm not gonna say no. Like, and why should a kid say no when there's typically no conditions? Yeah, they're gonna have to do some autographs and they're gonna have to say that they did something, so it's not a true pay for play. But at the same time, um, it would be almost impossible for these 17, 18-year-old kids just to say, wow, you're gonna pay me, $500,000 to come to this university over going to that university. Like, these kids aren't going to say no. And so, if there's people out there that have enough money and are willing to do this, then the kids should bear the fruit of that without a doubt.
I used to have this conversation with my mom, and philosophically, morally, all those things, she was right. But from a practical sense, I was right. And the conversation always went like this: why do teachers make $50,000 a year and athletes are making 10 and $20 million a year? Teachers are much more important to society. They are molding the lives of our children. And I would completely agree. And I'd say, you know what? You're right. However, we live in a society of supply and demand. Therefore, those athletes are only worth what we have determined as a society what they're worth. If we stop supporting that, then they're playing intramural football. And that's all it is. If we don't watch the games, go to the games, buy the merchandise, do all those things, then it ceases to be of value and it's worthless. We have given it that much worth. Therefore, it's yielding that kind of money. Therefore, if we're going to the professional ranks, again, there's a more of a formula of, well, we bring in this much money, therefore we're able to pay the players this much money. Here it's simply, well, I put this much value in the football success at this school and I'm a booster, I own a business, whatever. Therefore, I'm willing to invest this much money into the program and put it in that player or these three players or whatever the case might be.
Mhm.
And that's just reality.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had similar discussions with my dad. My dad is in his late 60s, and he hates the direction that athletics are going these days. And you can't convince him that what NIL is not pay for play. Like, there's nothing that you could do to convince him of that. So, and that's the what you said is the perfect solution. Like, if you're not supportive of this, if you don't like it, then don't don't subscribe, to the streaming services. Don't buy stuff from the university. Don't watch the games, and things like that. Like, that's the way that you show, just generally speaking, your displeasure. But people are going to continue to invest into the product. It's one of those things. Yeah, me and you can sit here and say that school teachers and other professions like that are severely underpaid for probably the value that they bring to the profession. But at the same time, um, people are willing to pay people are willing to pay this much and willing to do this much. And so, like, how do you say no, type of thing. And so I don't know. It's one of those things, and I understand that. But recruiting, and that's why I said, like, recruiting has always kind of been this way. It's just coming to the surface more so now, right? And so, like you have on the screen here, me personally, I would never pay more. I think the most I've ever, like, as a fan, paid for a football ticket, I think, is like $300. I don't know that I mean, if I had a lot of money, obviously $1,500 wouldn't be a big deal. But I don't know that I would ever spend $1,500 to go to any kind of a sporting event. But there are tons of people out there that will pay that, and won't even bat an eye, at the fact of being able to do that. So, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is, there's people that's going to continue to be willing to pay that amount. And it's going to be even worse or better, depending on your perspective, once the expansion of the playoffs happen. There'll be many more games, many more, opportunities, for not only these schools to make tons of money off of revenue from the TV, contracts and the TV side of things, but the additional game that they're going to get, that some of these, not everyone obviously, but some of these teams will get to be able to host, the first round of the playoff is going to be, it's just more money. So, yeah, I mean, I get, like I said, I'm with you. Just, if it's something that, as a fan, that bothers you that much, and it turns you away from it, then just, you know don't don't support it anymore. I mean, I think that's the only thing that you can do.
Yeah, so I respect the comment on the screen and I totally get it. But again, Hank, you need to understand that your pricing on what's ridiculous is based on your perspective. So $1,500 is ridiculous. I agree with you. I agree with you. However, understand that maybe somebody else might say $50 is ridiculous because their perspective is, I want to take my wife and 3 kids, so that's a family of 4, so it's going to cost me $200 at $50 per ticket, and then I'm going to buy everyone a hot dog and a drink and a da 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 da, and I'm going to pay $50 for parking and add it all up, and I'm going to pay $450 for 3 hours. So that person may consider it ridiculous. It's all based on your perspective, and it's based on how much money you make, what you consider to be ridiculous. And then on the flip side, what we were talking about before, supply and demand, is that $1,500 isn't ridiculous because why do they charge $1,500? Because they can. If
Mhm.
nobody paid the $1,500, then they couldn't charge the $1,500. What's funny, and it's somewhat amusing and somewhat pathetic, is that the people that complain about this, and again, I totally understand the complaints. I would like for all of this to be under control, to a great degree as well. So I am on your side. However, it's all about supply and demand. So the people that complain are the people that ultimately hold the power. So the fans ultimately hold the power. They're just not organized to be able to wield that power. They
Right.
don't organize, nor, to Jason's point, do many of them care enough to compromise their entertainment. All that would have to be done to wake a few people up would be to pick your sport, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, and we can even take it to college football. Nobody show up to any games for the first 3 weeks of the season. Have completely empty stadiums. Nobody buys tickets. You can sit at home and still watch the games. The ratings, the TV ratings could still be
Right.
phenomenal, but
Mhm.
that would just send a clear message to who holds the power ultimately. But the fans can't and will not organize. But that would just send a resounding point across to everyone that who ultimately holds the power? Well, the people that pay the bills ultimately are the fans.
Yep.
So just don't go to any games. Just do that for 3 weeks and have completely empty stadiums. Can you imagine Oklahoma? Of course, somebody's going to show up, but can you imagine a couple hundred people at the game?
Mhm.
That would send an enormous message.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's a good point. That would be, I mean, nothing that we would ever see, obviously, but that would be very interesting to see. That's how you send the message. That's what you do with stuff like that. But yeah, like I said, we know it's here to stay. It is what it is. Whether you like it or not, but it's a interesting part of the dynamics in collegiate athletics now. That maybe it's just a lot more public than it ever has been.
So, Hank, thank you for your honesty because Hank here, who said $1,500 for a ticket is ridiculous, also says that he happily pays $100 a month to be able to watch whatever games he wants. So for you, the $100 a month is not ridiculous. And that's the judgment and the evaluation you need to make for your own lifestyle and what you are willing to pay. Michael makes a comment here, excuse me, that people underestimate the value of games, which has been an important part of civilization for millennia. So again, it's all based on your perspective. Because we can argue one of my best friends would argue that sports are worthless, they're meaningless, although he loves to sit there and watch football games, but he's not like an ardent avid fan. He can take it or leave it, but he watches. He played football in high school. He enjoys watching, but he thinks it's worthless. Like, what is the value to this to society? To him, it's zero. It's this is not building bridges. This is not paving roads, building schools. This is not uh, required to have a society. That's his viewpoint. Others will take the viewpoint more so that Michael, that we need an entertainment outlet. We need to have fun. We need that enjoyment. We need that time away from reality. And therefore, sports and entertainment serve that purpose in life. And both viewpoints, again, are valid based on your perspective and what you value in life.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, and I would even take a different view on that, thinking it from the participants' perspective, especially young kids. Uh, we saw what the impact was during COVID when everything got shut down for months on end, and there's a lot of people, young kids that still struggle from the fact that they had, some were longer than others, but 6 to 8 months, 6 months to a year of like really just pure isolation and not being able to have that camaraderie with their team, and from a sporting perspective, not being able to see each other. And so like that's impactful for kids. Yes, I think as adults, we're just consumers of this product. And yeah, I mean, I mean, I think both points can be true simultaneously that you'd mentioned, right? Yeah, I mean, I understand the point and certainly agree with it that it's not doing anything to build a better world or a better place for everyone, but at the same time, it's part of the you know some and some people would say, including I know that me and you very much believe the same way. Like this is this to play a game. This is very much in certain aspects what some of these kids are called to do. It's their platform. They are called to do that, and some are able to use that platform in a very impactful way that that they do. Some obviously don't, but there's as many people that use that platform um, in the most positive way that they possibly can. So, I would argue that it is meaningful in that perspective, and it's meaningful to to the people that want just to have an outlet. Maybe people have a very, very stressful work life, and on Saturdays they just want to not think about any of the other things that they have going on and just enjoy, watching football games all day. So, or whatever sport it may be. And so I think all things can be true with that. But I do know that there's some people that really just can't get over the fact that I do this job that is very, very meaningful in is delivering a lot of value to society, a lot of value to the world, and these these guys are making millions and millions of dollars to play a game. But at the same time, I would argue, like as a school teacher, would you just like if they paid you $2 million a year as opposed to $30,000 a year, would you stop doing it? I mean, you're still gonna do it because it's what you do it at $30,000 because it's what you feel led to do. It's what you feel called to do. And so um, some of these kids feel called to do the same thing, and just because there's people that are willing to give them that amount of money, we shouldn't blame the kids, or we shouldn't blame ourselves for wanting to support something like that.
Jason, I don't mean to put you on the spot because I know recruiting is difficult to follow, and we're still technically in the 2023 cycle with National Signing Day, the second edition coming up the first week of February. But I'm seeing just a number of offers that have gone out for 2024. Four-star quarterback Walker White, Michigan State 2024 four-star cornerback commit Jalen Thompson, 2024 safety Isaiah Thomas, 2024 four-star cornerback Selman Bridges. Just anything that you've picked up on any of those guys. And
Well, I mean, I think the one thing, and not specifically, and as we talk about this, I just saw a tweet that the Florida kid has officially been released from his national letter of intent. But I think the guy that not specifically with those guys, but the name that I've seen a lot, and I think a kid that's really probably going to commit at really any time is Michael Hawkins, quarterback in this 2024 cycle. So Oklahoma has got tons of offers, but there's a lot of mutual interest. There's a lot of noise going on about this kid. So I think he's the next guy that I can think about, or that I have at the top of my list for Oklahoma, who's kind of got some offers, and a guy that's probably going to be, I would suspect, the first guy that pulls the trigger for this 2024 class.
we also found out here recently that the Oklahoma spring game is set for Saturday, April 22nd at the conclusion of spring practice.
Yeah. Now that'll be interesting this year, Mark. I mean, I think when you look at how things were last year to where they are, right now, there was, the Oklahoma fans had the shiny new toy and they wanted to go out and see it and watch it and see what it looked like. And I'm in Oklahoma had the highest attended spring game in the country, I believe, last year. So what will that look like a year after that with the 6 and 7 season? I think the fan base is still excited. I think they are. I think very cautiously optimistic is probably the word that the phrase that I would use. I think there's a lot of I mean, there's going to be a lot of newness to this team in terms of roster turnover that wasn't necessarily dissimilar last year. We had talked about how there was about 40% of this roster, 35% of this roster that was new. It's going to be very similar this year. I think probably, Mark. I think the thing that's going to bring a lot of people here for this spring game is the quarterback competition. I think there is a lot of last year there was a little bit of unknown with Dylan Gabriel, right? A lot of people wanted to see him. They saw him from, when he was at UCF, but wanted to see him in person at Oklahoma and see what that looked like. Now, the backup quarterback's always the most popular kid in the fan base's mind, typically. So there's going to be just an insane amount of pressure on Dylan Gabriel this year, and it's going to start with the spring game, and just to see how good he is. If you see a guy, I think the first sign of struggle and the first sign of success that Jackson Arnold has is is going to be something to look out for. And I don't know, Mark. I mean, we've talked about this a lot in terms of true freshmen. It's hard for, specifically at the quarterback position, it's hard for true freshmen to come in and start immediately. And I'm just kind of, as we're talking here, Mark, trying to rack my brain. I'm trying to remember the first, and I'm sure I'm just missing someone who's obvious, but the last true freshman that came in to start the season. We've got some people like Trevor Lawrence that started mid-season. Kate Klubnik kind of started towards the um, end of the season this past year. But trying to remember a true freshman that started day one. And so I think the benefit that Jackson Arnold is getting is that he's coming in the spring. He's going to be able to kind of go through that stuff, learn the offense and things like that. But I think the thing that probably wouldn't be disputed is the fact that Jackson Arnold is probably more physically talented than Dylan Gabriel. He's got a better release. He's got a stronger arm. He's a little bit more mobile and can run a little bit better in the pocket. And this kid is coming in with just tons of accolades. Gatorade National Player of the Year, Texas State Player of the Year, Elite 11 MVP 2 consecutive years in a row. Like he's a guy at the likes of a Spencer Rattler, the likes of a Caleb Williams that's coming in here. That is, I think, overall number 6 player in the country, and so I mean, there's a lot of pressure on Dylan Gabriel and seeing what that looks like. And there's always some thoughts, and there's always some there's going to continue to be a lot of concern, skepticism on the defensive side. But I think it's a little bit of skepticism that's met with the thought that, okay, once Brent and this team is able to get their guys in, they feel comfortable now with all the additions from the transfer portal and this recruiting class coming in, and then the second year of this freshman class here in 2022. What does that look like? So it'll be very intriguing to see, I think, if the fans flock to the stadium at the same level that they were last year.
I am scanning all over the place and not coming up with a true freshman who started his first game at any school. I'm thinking a lot of examples. Jake Fromm started his freshman year, but it was a few games in before Jacob Eason got hurt that he was given his chance 3 or 4 games into the season. Of course, Trevor Lawrence, you just mentioned. CJ Stroud was a redshirt freshman. Everybody I'm thinking of, aside from, I believe, because there was a quarterback at Minnesota a couple years ago, and I think his name was Alex Anixted,
Mm,
who was a walk-on
right.
true freshman quarterback. And the reason he became part of a trivia answer was he was the only player other than famously Baker Mayfield who was a walk-on true freshman who won the job at Texas Tech.
Yep, that's true. The the Minnesota kid, I had remember right as you were starting to speak about him, I had remembered that one. So, yeah, I mean, it's happened. So it's not something it's gonna be setting a precedent, but it's not something that happens very often. So, and I think Jackson Arnold, he'd kind of, you wonder how much of this is just player speak, but he was, thrilled to see that Dylan Gabriel was coming back, thrilled the fact that that really he would have an opportunity to learn a little bit from him in terms of the offense and in terms of, what this looks like at this level versus high school. So, whether that's true or not, I mean, I think every kid wants to come in and play immediately unless that they know they're not developed at the same level. So we'll see how that goes, Mark. But I think it'll be something at the very least for Oklahoma fans. I think Oklahoma can be much more confident if the starter goes down that you got another guy that's capable of going in and making some plays for you.
I'm verifying 2 guys, and I think they started as true freshmen their first game. JT Daniels, USC, and Dorian Thompson Robinson, UCLA. But yeah, that's it's really rare. Bryce
Yeah,
Young did not.
yeah.
Justin Fields.
Well,
We can go down the list of the elite quarterbacks in the last 5 to 10 years.
yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, JT Daniels has went through just, I mean, a ton of injuries in his career as well, but he's gone through a ton of teams. But he was pretty effective as a true freshman for USC. Played pretty well. DTR was not quite as good as a excuse me, as a true freshman, but yeah, it's there's some obvious limitations that Dylan Gabriel has but I think the one thing that you have to keep, I mean, he has enormous knowledge in this system, in Jeff Levy's system, having been with him at UCF, and then obviously this past year at Oklahoma. Does the experience and the knowledge of the offense overtake the kind of the raw talent and natural abilities, but obviously less knowledge and less experience. So it will be, I think it will be interesting. I would, and this is, at this point, things could change a ton between now and end of August, early September. But I would be. I still think Dylan Gabriel probably gets the nod early on, but wouldn't at all be surprised to see at some point as Jackson Earl kind of gets the knowledge and gets the experience and the understanding that he would possibly be in a position to overtake him at some point in the season.
The remarkable thing about JT Daniels, this is all coming back to me now, is that he not only started as a true freshman at USC, but he was supposed to be a high school senior who
Uh,
reclassified. And because of the situation surrounding his reclassification, he was not able to participate in spring practice. So he didn't start until the summer in school and still won the starting job. And they trotted him out week 1 against UNLV, and he went 21 for 35 for 282 and a touchdown right out of the gate.
yeah, so it certainly can happen. I'm trying to remember back to that team if there was a viable alternative just in terms of
Yeah.
what he was. And I don't remember at this point, but
They didn't have a good team. They went 5-7.
yeah, I was trying to remember. Was that the year? Was Keaton Slovis on that team yet, or had he? Was that a year before?
Yeah,
Uh,
so the year before was Sam Darnold's last season.
yeah.
So then Darnold leaves and JT Daniels wins the job. And I thought he was in competition with like Max Brown.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. You're right. You're
it
right.
was the next season that
Slovis.
he started at the beginning of the year, got hurt the first or second game, and Keaton Slovis came in. But I don't know what his class status was at that point, if he was around the year before or not. But yeah, apparently not. So yeah, Keaton Slovis was not on that 2018 team. He was a freshman. He was a true freshman in 2019 and took over for JT Daniels at 2 or 3 games into the season and threw 30 touchdowns.
Yep. Yep. I remember that now. So yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. It's something that is a possibility. I mean, I think the natural reaction is if you have to start a true freshman as your starting quarterback at Oklahoma, then you're in some trouble. But I wouldn't necessarily think that's the case with the experience that you got with Dylan Gabriel. I think it would be a situation where he was just that good, and it's impossible to keep him off the field. So, not a situation where, well, there's no one else, and this is like a USC situation that was a 5-7 team that just didn't have another real good option at that spot.
Folks, we appreciate you being here for our Oklahoma show that we typically present each and every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. So we expect to be back at our regular time next week, Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time with Jason Ray, who, of course, hosts our post-game shows throughout the Oklahoma college football season. All right, Jason, we appreciate you hanging out. We appreciate you delivering. We hope you feel better soon.
Thank you.
And we'll catch everybody back here next Wednesday on OU Sooners Live.